Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's Workers' Comp 101 webinar. I'm Allie Price from the Board's Stakeholder Engagement Unit. Joining me today is Joe Cavalcante, the Board's Advocate for Injured Workers. Today, Joe will cover the basics of workers' compensation, including employees' rights if they become injured or ill on the job, employees' benefits under workers' compensation, how to file a claim, how to get help with your claim if needed, information regarding COVID-19 claims, and tips and best practices for injured workers. We ask you to please keep your phone lines muted, as we'll be using the chat feature to receive your questions today. You may enter your questions throughout the presentation in the chat box located on the right-hand side of your screen. Joe will answer as many of your questions as he can, but if there's anything he doesn't get to, or if you think of something after the session today, we will be providing you with additional resources at the end of the presentation to reach out. Your name and email were given to us when you registered. However, if you have a specific topic you'd like to discuss more in depth with the board, please share that topic along with your contact information in the chat box so the appropriate board staff can follow up with you. The chat settings are set so that only we can see it, so feel free to put any comments and questions in there, and don't worry about anyone seeing your contact info. We got you covered. With that, I will hand it over to Joe, and we will get started.
Thank you, Allie. Good morning. Hope everyone is doing well on this unseasonably warm autumn day. The leaves are changing. There's a New York team in the World Series. Football's raging. We are going to get into the wonderful world of workers' compensation now, and we are going to begin that discussion before there's ever an incident. It's in everyone's interest to create a safer workplace, wouldn't you say? Here is an idea that anyone can use in any workplace. We call it the Labor Management Safety Committee. The idea here is for people to simply talk to each other, members of labor and management. They can talk to each other and try to identify the places in the work area, the workplace, that could or are creating incidents. And then you work to mitigate them or eliminate them. We have some ideas on screen for how you might wish to structure your committee, but the point is you can get out of your conference rooms and go into your workplaces and do some safety inspections. Just visit the spots that could or are presenting potential threats to employee safety. Why don't you take a look at your equipment? Why don't you make sure it's been properly maintained and hasn't been altered? Why don't you review your procedures for how you do your work? Can you review your procedures? Did you write them down? As a former technical writer, I'm going to recommend please write them down, please ensure that they're safe, and please ensure that the people who are training are cognizant of safety. This will benefit everyone, including yourselves. We have a Labor Management Safety Committee at our agency. Workers' compensation is a no-fault insurance system. That means there is insurance somewhere in the mix, and there is a payer of the claims on the insurance side, as in the Workers' Comp Board does not pay the claims unless there's one small instance where we might advance the money. We'll cover that in a moment. The employers of New York State must provide this coverage to protect their workers. This way, if the worker should suffer an on-the-job incident, the insurance is going to pick up the medical care costs and the lost wages. And if you're an employer, well, this also absolves you from liability. The employees do not contribute to the cost of this insurance, so employees, you won't see this on your pay stub as a deduction. This is here as your right. It is your legal right, workers. You cannot negotiate it away. You cannot sign it away. And as a matter of fact, the benefits we're going to discuss today, you could think of as a minimum because you could negotiate a richer benefit. Also, immigration status of the worker is not a factor. This is one of the few categorical statements I can make in the comp system. Immigration status is not a factor in any way, shape, or form, period. Also, let's say you want some assistance doing, let's say you don't speak English terribly well, or you don't wish to speak in English, you'd rather speak in another language. Well, we have language access services available at no charge for free. And we are showing you now our webpage wherein we have these methods to get translation. We have the top 12 languages that more than 90% of New Yorkers speak, readily accessible in the form of our publications. So our publications already are translated into these 12 languages. If you need something in another language, or if you need a translator, or an interpreter, I should say, at a hearing, the board will provide it for the workers. Allie, why don't we do that question?
All right. So someone asked, quick question, when discussing employer expectations, do I need to send the statement of rights?
So if you're an employer or a payer, that is a lovely, wonderful thing to do. Thank you very much if you do that. Okay, so let's go on to the next topic. We've already got one question done. The Workers' Comp Board. This is mine and Allie's employer. We are a New York State government agency. We are the regulator of the workers' comp system. We have around 1,000 employees at about 24 offices and hearing points all across the state. We are open to the public for business. So you do have to make an appointment to come in, but go on ahead and make that appointment. And if you want to do your hearing in person, you're going to probably have a virtual hearing first, and then tell the judge, I'd like to have my next hearing in person. And then you can do that. How do we accomplish our mission? Well, we receive reports of injuries and reports of treatment and reports of payment. We have these enormous files. We have records going back to 1914, my friends, the first year of workers' comp in this state. And we use all that information to help administer claims and regulate the comp system. We also hold hearings when appropriate so that claims can be adjudicated and move forward. Now, there's this Office of the Advocate for Injured Workers. Well, that is my honorary title, Advocate for Injured Workers. I manage that office. My civil service title is actually Ombudsman. So if you want to know what I really do, I'm concerned as Ombudsman with the health of the comp system, the sanctity of the comp system. And when I look at the comp system, I also look to see, okay, is it working as it ought to for injured workers? Although if something was not working well for employers, I would have to bring that forward. I have a duty to do that, and by the way, I have in the past. My office and we help workers with the more difficult and complex claims. And we are also involved in fatality claims because there is a fatality benefit that we will discuss. Also, I am the board's liaison to the 9/11 community. We are showing you right now the webpage that the board maintains for World Trade Center assistance. Just want to call out very quickly to you these three different elements of it. New York State government is very responsibly and firmly committed to letting the public know through an initiative coming from the governor that if you were impacted by the World Trade Center attacks between September 11 and May 30, 2002, you should really be taking advantage of these federal services. On the left, World Trade Center Health Program. This is what they call the Zadroga Fund. This is what World Trade Center advocates are in New York City, that are in Washington right now lobbying to get more funding, because for some reason they need to do this repeatedly. The World Trade Center health programs are there to provide health care at no cost to people who were impacted by the attacks. This includes responders, this includes victims of the direct attacks, this includes anyone who was in the area and who might have been in that dust cloud. There are World Trade Center health programs nationally. The New York metro area has many different locations. I urge you to check that out. Also, the September 11 Victim Comp Fund, that is money that has been allocated to provide compensation to people who suffered physical harm during those attacks and in the aftermath, or the survivors of people who were lost. The other element, I should say first, that is being run by the Federal Department of Justice. You go to vcf.gov and you check that one out. And then finally, the volunteer fund, that's something that the Comp Board, if there were people who actually volunteered and went down to the pile right after the buildings fell. And so this is the one instance where those people who were volunteers can have a comp benefit. So you would check that out on our site. So I'd encourage you to come to this website that the board maintains to learn more about this. All right, our next topic is, we're getting into the nitty-gritty of the system now. Who's going to pay that workers' comp claim? Well, remember we mentioned insurance? There are two ways that the employer can get that insurance, because this is incumbent upon the employer to arrange. The first way, the employer can buy an insurance policy. Last year, 2023, 290 different insurance carriers wrote comp insurance in the great state of New York. The biggest one by far is known as NYSIF, or the New York State Insurance Fund, NYSIF, and they're insuring about a third of the entire market. They're a government and quasi-government, they call it, entity, but there are 289 other insurance companies who will write a policy. The other way that the insurance can be provided is what's known as self-insurance. That means the employer has the financial resources to devote to paying the claims out of its own financial resources. Now that breaks down two ways. The first way is public employers. Those are government entities, cities, towns, counties, school districts. Those are government employers. They can and they very frequently do self-insure. And then the other road is private corporations can self-insure, but we're not talking about Allie's Halloween shop in Batavia, New York here. We're talking about multi-billion-dollar international corporations would be the ones who would do this, because you need those financial resources to devote to paying the claims yourself, and you also have to apply to this board for permission to do that, and you have to post collateral. The big message here on the self-insured side is that you will almost always, as an injured worker, you will almost always be dealing with a claim administrator, a separate organization who's handling the claims. Your manager, your HR department, they're not going to know anything about the claim. Once an incident happens, the employer is usually out of the mix. You now have to deal with the payer. There are some very large government entities who are self-insured, who did not formally hire a claim administrator, but they tend to establish like a whole separate wing or division of employees to handle the comp, and they tend to function as claim administrator. So that's the main point there is don't ask your supervisor about your comp claim, not going to know. And then finally, the last bullet, We're now going to explain that little opening I left earlier. If an employer is not carrying insurance and should have been, and there's an incident, the board, our employer, will advance the payments, and then we're going to bill the owners of that business personally. That gets very expensive. If you're a worker, don't worry about the insurance, just file the claim, okay? That's the message there. Now, let's talk in a little more detail for a moment or two about who needs this insurance coverage. Businesses, okay? You have businesses and you have nonprofits. Businesses for profit. So a business who has employees should have the coverage. That's even one part-time employee. There's no minimum number of employees, unless I guess the minimum number is one. Okay, so if you have one employee, you need coverage. If you're the owner of the business, you can exclude yourself from coverage. However, I just want to ask you the question, why would you exclude yourself? What are you going to do if you get hurt? The Advocate for Business and there is an advocate for business. He does these sessions also from his perspective on his side of the business, usually at the beginning of the month. So check webinars and sign up for his. Great guy. He and I had a conversation with a business owner about 2 weeks ago who excluded himself. And this man was dreadfully injured. So just want to point that out. If you're a business owner, if you're going to exclude yourself, think long and hard, please. But if you have employees, you need this insurance coverage. Most nonprofits with employees are also required to carry this coverage.
We had a question come in related to this. So are non-paid interns covered by workers' comp if injured?
Probably. Intern is a really unspecific noun, I have to tell you. That's pretty much lost its meaning. So, and I'm not criticizing you. I'm just going to be extremely precise now. If you truly have an intern and the intern is non-paid, that means that the intern is getting college credit. That's the compensation, so to speak. And so, yes, if you have a non-paid person in your work area, I was going to say on your payroll, but technically maybe not. But if there's somebody working for you who fits these criteria, and that person gets injured and it rises to the level of a comp claim, yes, tell your payer, file it. Tell your payer for sure, okay? You don't have to make that decision yourself. Your payer is probably almost certainly much more knowledgeable in comp. Tell your payer. Okay, now let's go to the next level down. Who's an employee? Because we're talking about employees. Well, anyone who's providing services to a for-profit business, such as that non-paid intern, anyone who's providing services to a for-profit can be determined to be an employee of that business, which then makes the person eligible for workers' comp. Guess who determines if that person's an employee or not? Do you want to tell them? Okay. The board does. We do. So that means you might think that you're an independent contractor. Okay, that's fine. But if there's an incident, you probably should tell us because we actually make the determination. And on the nonprofit side, anyone who's compensated in a nonprofit can also be determined to be an employee and therefore eligible for comp. There are some limited defined exceptions, such as clergy or teachers in a 501c3. Those are pretty well defined as exceptions, but if you wish to cover those people, I think you can. The point here is there's a term that's used a lot in the public known as the independent contractor. there are such people, but what we want to make you aware of is that it is absolutely, definitely happens every day possible to be an independent contractor for tax purposes, but not for workers' comp purposes. That's why, number one, I was mentioning the board will decide who's an employee for comp purposes, and we use different criteria than the tax department does when making the decision for tax purposes. So it's going to come down to a question of direction and control. Is that employer exercising direction and control over that worker's activities? If the answer is yes, then you're probably going to be an employee, and this does include internet businesses. This does, because there are very big businesses that talk about side hustles and so forth who are carrying workers' comp insurance. So the lesson here is file the claim. You got hurt? File the claim. It's okay. Even if you're not covered, it's okay. Just file it. Let us sort it out. All right, so we're talking about filing claims. New topic, what do you do if there's an incident? Number one, this is from the worker's perspective now. We're talking to workers, but everyone else, please listen because this impacts you and your actions as well. Number one, worker, go get your medical care. Go get it now. Your mother was right. Take care of your health. Get your care. Then, after you got your care, tell your employer in writing about the incident. Now, you should do it within 30 days, and you should do it in writing. And when we say writing, here's a tip. Use a document, use an email. Those are things that have audit trails. You can legally use a text message. It's all right legally, except I don't recommend it because I don't have to know what phone you're using to know your default setting is to keep your text for 30 days because they're all set to that, my friends. And unless you changed it, you're not going to have that text in 31 days. Suppose you need to show it to somebody in a year. So do that, and then after you gave your notice to your employer, which is hugely important, you can file your own claim. You're going to file what's known as a C3. C for claims 3. We are showing you right now the online tool. This is on the board's website. You certainly may go on ahead and fill this in online. See, we have a few tabs going across, and this is really all you have to do. It is not complex. It's not hard. You can do it on paper if you wish, or if there's something about the online that is not working for you, go ahead and do it on paper. You can get the paper. We will always take paper from workers. We might not take paper from professionals in the system, but we don't expect workers to be professionals. Use the paper or use this. If you can use this online, please do because it's clean and it's immediate. Okay, so now you filed that document. You let us know. You also told your employer, which is hugely important because your employer tells your payer tells us. That's a legal chain of events that has to happen. And then the last thing we want to tell you about this, because this is, this is a 101, so we have to move quickly on the surface level. You have 2 years as a worker after the incident to file a C3. Okay, here's your distinction. Allie, somebody's going to ask this question, so I'm going to just do it right now. I'm telling you, you really need to tell your employer within 30 days you had an incident. Hey, boss, I think I broke my toe. Okay, happened this morning. Okay, and then the boss says, well, go to the urgent care, please. That's you, and then you tell them in writing, that's you doing that in 30 days, but if you want to file a claim, you have 2 years to actually file the claim. See the difference? And now, a word from Allie.
All righty, we have a poll, so I'm going to open the poll now. So this poll is saying, should Kadir file a claim? Here's the scenario. Kadir is not an American citizen and is in the U.S. on a work visa. He works 40 hours a week on site at a software company at an assigned desk using that company's equipment on tasks the company assigns. Kadir is paid on a 1099, so the software firm considers him an independent contractor. One day, Kadir is inattentive and drops a computer server, and it fractures his left leg. The employer calls an ambulance that takes Kadir to the hospital. So the question is, should Kadir file a claim? I see people's answers are coming in.
Oh, let me see.
Ooh, we got a good one. Here we go.
Here we go.
Okay, so we have a lot of yeses. We have one no. We got about half of people haven't answered yet. We'll give it a few more seconds. What do we think? Should he file a claim based on that information? What do we think, Joe?
My thinking, Allie, is if I was Kadir, yes, I would file a claim, and I would recommend to Kadir that a claim be filed. The reason is we've given you enough facts in here to indicate that this happened in the workplace, and we threw in a whole bunch of red herrings to make you think, oh, does it count? Does it matter? Kadir is not an American citizen. So what? He's on a work visa. So what? Not a factor. Okay? He's 40 hours a week at the same place, at the same office, at the same desk, using the company's equipment. The only thing that might make you think is he's on a 1099, but remember, a 1099 in and of itself is not determinative. That's a tax arrangement. Okay, and then he was inattentive, doesn't matter, it's a no-fault insurance system. The injury still happened on the job, that's right. Someone is telling us that. And then finally, here's an advanced concept. The employer called an ambulance. So if there was ever a question in litigation about whether notice was given or the employer knew about it, et cetera, well, they called an ambulance, so they obviously knew about it. That could have been to anyone. Okay, so why don't we go on to the next topic? Medical benefits. There are three primary benefits we're going to cover: medical, lost wages, and then the fatality. So the medical. These are delivered to the worker at no cost to the worker. We're talking about medically necessary treatment for the work-related injury or illness, and it is a lifetime benefit. So workers, you get your injury established, medical care is yours for the rest of your life for that incident. Providers who are on this session with us, we are thrilled to have you. Thank you for joining us. You do not need to contact a payer and ask about reopening a claim if there was no Section 32 waiver agreement, which is our version of a settlement. If there was no Section 32 waiver agreement, you don't have to reopen anything. The claim is open for benefits for that established site or condition. If you're treating something that's not established, well, please provide the treatment and then provide the proper reports so that the worker can get the site or condition established. Now, we're talking about all the medical expenses, the testing, the visits, the surgeries, the hospital care, PT, et cetera, et cetera. There's one other element that we always mention because people don't always know about it, and that's travel reimbursement. So, you're an injured worker, you have to travel for care, you can be reimbursed for the expenses going to get that care. Here's the form you use. It's called C-257. I don't know how we arrived at 257 for that one. But you can see also, it's pretty simple. Look at this, this section here, nature of expense. Okay, traveled to treatment with Dr. Price. Date, October 23, 2024. Amount. Well, did you take the subway? You put in the subway amount. Did you drive? Well, if you drove, then you do the mileage and you do the times whatever the amount is for that year. We have the reimbursable amounts on our site. It's somewhere around 67 cents a mile, somewhere around there right now, okay, for these days. And if you need the number of miles, just use a mapping tool that we all, the payers, the board, we all use the mapping tools. They all come up with the same number of miles. Okay, so if you're a worker, you can submit that, send it to the payer, send it to the board, send it to the board, get it in your board file, please, so that we can see it. You can go back to day one. Even if you got hurt 21 years ago, you can go back to day one. There's no time limit. Here's the best practice for medical care. First of all, give your doctors a fighting chance. Show up at your appointments with your WCB case number. It's going to be 8 characters. If it's recent, it's going to start with the letter G, like glorious. If you're a volunteer ambulance driver, or it'll start with AA. If you're a volunteer firefighter, it'll start with FA. It'll be 8 characters, probably a letter, and then the rest are numbers. The insurance carrier or payer is also going to give its own number. Show up with that, and show up with the name of that insurance payer, please, so they know who to bill. Then there's this other thing called the degree of disability. If you're a worker and you are in temporary world, okay, you don't have a permanent partial or permanent total disability, you would know that if you did, because you'd go through hearings to get there. But you're in temporary world, you're temporary partial, temporary total. You need to go see the doctor every 90 days because the provider, doctors, PAs, and nurse practitioners can all give you this degree of disability, okay? They need to say every 90 days if you are disabled and how disabled you might be, because your benefit is based on that. If you don't have that, you're not going to get paid your lost wages because there's no evidence that you're actually disabled. So do that, understand your degree of disability, and if you're a provider, next week on October 30, the day before Halloween, we are doing the Workers' Comp 202. That's another session that we do which goes into way more detail, much deeper detail on these topics. If you're a provider and you're on this session right now, please sign up for that one too. If you're a payer or an injured worker, you want to know more, please sign up for that one too, because we go into this at a much deeper level of detail that will be helpful to you, I'm sure of it. I think we cover this topic over there too, independent medical exams. There are only 1 or 2 topics I covered twice, but this is a pretty big one. And yes, as someone is commenting, if you want to sign up for the 202, you have to sign up yourself. Thank you. But let's talk about independent medical exams for a moment. This is when the payer is asking the worker to see a doctor that the payer hired to give an opinion on some element of the worker's health or claim. So it's going to be very tightly proscribed. The doctor's going to be asked, can you please give an opinion on this or this and this? That's it. So workers, here's what you need to know. Number 1, there is no doctor-patient relationship here. Number 2, you are not going to receive treatment. You are not going to receive treatment recommendations. You may bring a witness. One of you may record the IME. That includes video and audio. Now, if you're a payer, I'm speaking to you right now. Will you please do what you can to make the doctors aware that the injured worker can record the exam. The injured worker does not need to provide notice. The injured worker does not need to do anything other than show up even with a witness, and show up with some sort of device that can record it, maybe a cell phone. Okay, I have received a great number of complaints in the past week about one or two particular doctors at one or two particular IME sites, who don't seem to know this. So anything you can do to educate those doctors is going to be very appreciated. Because, see that last bullet? If there is a complaint about the conduct of the IME, I get it. So it should be sent to my office with as much detail as you can provide. Okay, the reason you're doing the recording, if you choose to do it, is you are definitely going to get a report with the findings from that exam, and you can read that report and say, oh yeah, I remember that. Oh yeah, I remember that. If you come to the point where you're saying, what? I don't remember that. Well, you might want to check your video. And if you're still saying, we have a disconnect here. If you have a lawyer, tell your lawyer, because the lawyers understand a lot more about what's going on at one of these exams than a layperson does. But still, if there is still a disconnect, you're going to report it to my office. I'm going to see it and triage it and send it to the discipline committee. And then finally, you can claim travel reimbursement for these trips to these exams. Again, no time limit. Use Form C-257 and a little plea to the people who arrange these exams. Anything you can do probably to keep the exam as close to the worker's home as possible is going to be appreciated. Let's talk about the lost wage benefit. This is called indemnity, if you want the formal term. So the most the worker is going to receive is 2/3 of what the worker was previously earning on average. There's a concept known as the average weekly wage. What happens is we look back 52 weeks or 1 year from the incident date and say, how much did this person earn on average per week? Come up with that number, and then the most you can receive is 2/3 of that number, 66.6666666%. It's tax-free, okay? So don't forget that. It is tax-free, but it's 2/3, and 2/3 would be 100% disability. Like you can't work. You're 100% disabled, you'd get the highest amount, 2/3. All your compensation counts. Overtime, it counts. Bonuses, they count. All your compensation counts. If you have 2 jobs, that's called concurrent employment. You need to tell us about your 2 jobs. You'll say that on the C3. But you need to tell us because if you can't work one, you can't work the other. So you also need to combine the 2 wages to come up with a true average weekly wage. The maximum amount is in the second bullet, $1171.46 per week. The minimum amount right now that you can receive is $275 per week on January 1st, which is
Not far away.
Not far away, my friend. Happy holidays. It's going up to $325 per week. It's just that what you have to understand is your date of accident, your date of incident, you're always going to be subject to that maximum, that minimum. So if you were injured today, your minimum's $275. If you were injured on January 2nd, your minimum would be $325. And then it's going to be recalibrated again in 18 months, wherein it's going to be what's called indexed, as in every year it's going to change on the same day the maximum benefit changes, and it's going to be based on the average payroll in the entire state of New York. If you were earning less, you would get full wages. Your benefits. Remember I was talking about temporary and permanent? Well, all the incidents are temporary at first, and then the worker's either going to heal, which is almost all workers, thankfully. they heal back to 100%. Some don't, though, unfortunately, and those would be the folks who have the permanent injuries. It's going to shake out into permanent partial. You have a permanent partial disability or a permanent total disability. If you're permanent total, no one expects you to work again ever, and you would get the most benefits that you qualified for. You really should sign up for the 202, the Comp 202, if you're interested in this. We spend a lot of time on this topic. There's also a benefit should you lose the use of one of your limbs. Now, when we say limbs, we're going to talk about this just for a moment because it's important. When we say limbs, we are talking about the following: an arm, a hand, and each finger. Each finger has a different benefit amount possible. We're also talking about a leg and a foot and each toe. Each of those items, those body parts, has a different amount of benefit available for payment should you lose some of the use of that limb. And when we say lose some use, you might lose 10% of the use of an arm. You might lose 90% or 100%. Well, there's a benefit available. It's called the schedule loss of use. You might want to sign up for the 202 because we talk about it there as well. Also, here's a little tip for you. Please, when you file your claim or if you have a hearing, please get the exact address where you were working when you got hurt. This is hugely important in a small but very contentious and expensive part of the system, construction accidents happening in cities, because a number of people show up to work at these job sites and they don't technically know where they are, okay? They might know they're on 39th Street, but they don't even know if it's East 39th or West 39th, and then they don't know what the address was, and you need to get your address, my friends, because if you do, then we can pull the building permit, and we know who the contractors are who were there, and that gets us much, much closer to finding out who the insurance company is who's insuring you. Okay? All right, what's next, Allie?
Payment.
Oh, my gosh. Okay, this is a big one. Two really simple things, my friends. Number one, please, 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 if you can get a bank account, would you please sign up for direct deposit to get your checks? Let's say you're getting paid every 2 weeks and you have a choice. Do you want to wait around for the U.S. mail for the check to come, or do you want to have it automatically deposited in your bank account? I have no idea why you would not have direct deposit. The second one is, if you are getting paid in cash, that's fine. Cash is legal tender. I'm recommending, I bet you Allie agrees, that you might want to keep some records of these payments. You might want to get a notebook and just write down who paid you, how much, what day, for doing what. Because if you ever need to, I don't know, report an average weekly wage or help us calculate one, well, if you have records and somebody else does not, might turn out better for you than you might be thinking. There's one more benefit that we like to cover, and it's the fatality benefit. And this is, the most serious benefit in the system. Let's say that there is an incident where the worker perishes due to employment. Well, we're going to show you right now the fatality fact sheet that we developed. I'm pretty proud of this. I wrote this one. And there are some things you have to do, but let me tell you first the benefit. Number one is funeral or memorial expenses. If you're in the traditional downstate area, that's New York City, Long Island, Westchester, Rockland, up to $12,500 is reimbursable for funeral and memorial costs. In the rest of the state, it's $10,500. There's an indemnity benefit that's payable. here's what happens. Number one, you're going to get the maximum amount possible when we're going to need that average weekly wage and so forth. Now, who's going to receive this benefit? First, we look for a lawfully wed spouse. The gender is not relevant of the spouse, okay? And we're talking lawfully wed. Then we look for children of the deceased. If the children are up to the age of 18, they can share. If the children are in higher education, they can continue to share up to the age of 23 with the spouse. If there is no spouse, they just share the benefit totally, but they do age out. Finally, we also look for other dependents, such as blind or disabled. They can share the benefit for life. So there's one benefit payment, everyone shares it. There's a formula, the judge will do the formula and tell everyone how much they get. As other people come off of the benefit, the other people, their share grows or increases. If none of those parties exist, the worker's parents can share $50,000. If none of those parties exist, the estate gets $50,000. That means we're dealing with an executor or executrix, okay? This is the fatality benefit. If this is you, you might be hearing from my office. We also like to point out there are 2 nonprofits who give scholarships to the children of workers who were either perished or were grievously injured, okay? Kids Chance of New York. This is a national organization that has a chapter in every state. kcnewyork.org. If this is you, go on ahead and visit that site and find out how you can apply for a scholarship for higher ed. There's a second one. I'm so happy that there are at least 2 organizations doing this. There's a second one called the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory Fire Memorial. They similarly, the worker perished or was grievously injured. These kids can also apply for a scholarship with this organization and happen to know both organizations are always asking for applications. So if that's you or someone you know, please check that out. COVID-19. Yes, COVID-19 is an infectious disease. Infectious diseases are payable in the comp system. Medical reports are going to be the key. Now, as the pandemic burst and then waned and COVID has become endemic, yes, it is still an infectious disease. It's still payable. Lyme disease is an infectious disease. That's payable. Okay, so you see the logic here. Now, how do you do the claim? Well, here are a couple highlights. Number one, the medicals are going to be key. If you can get a PCR test, file it. No, we don't use the home test. But PCR test, yes. Otherwise, if you don't have a PCR test, you can have a medical completed by a provider who can opine or give an opinion that you have COVID. That's okay. You want to get those medicals in. You want to tell your employer. We have some information on screen about what you might want to tell the provider and the employer too, by the way, because that could be helpful. Particularly, are you in a workplace where people have COVID? And that's obviously like an emergency department or a medical practice, sure, but it also includes an office setting where all of a sudden COVID's gone through the whole office. Yes, if you get it from a coworker, that is what we call compensable or payable. Okay, we have a fact sheet. We have a short video available on our website that you're welcome to review. This was another thing that I worked on, so you can check that out at your leisure. But now I think
it's another poll.
Okay, go ahead, Allie, please.
This is relating to our COVID line of thought here. So Similar to the first question, should Liz file a claim? So I'm opening up the poll now. Here's the scenario. Liz worked at a big box store in the seasonal department during the holidays, dealing with the public. Liz fell ill and called in sick to work, and she had a PCR test positive for COVID-19. She received paid sick leave for missing 2 weeks of work, and she also found out several of her coworkers had COVID at the same time. So the question is, should Liz file a claim for COVID exposure? Yes or no? All right, so the poll's running, Joe. Got a lot of people answering.
Lovely.
Looks like mostly yeses.
Okay, let's see what the people say.
Let's see what people say.
And we're also going to read, we're going to answer the question that's just come in about COVID.
Oh, okay. So yes, while everyone's answering the poll, we had a related question. What establishes that COVID-19 was contracted at the workplace and not from home or social contact?
Okie dokes. COVID-19 is an infectious disease, and the source or where you contracted it is going to be key, and so we're going to consider it like any other question of payability, compensability. Where'd you get it? What that means is we're going to, number one, need to establish, did you actually have COVID? Okay, let's say you did. So where'd you contract it? Well, this is where the medical reports come in, because the providers do have to answer 3 questions. Degree of disability, are you working, and what's known as causality. Is what they're treating a work-related incident. So they will give an opinion. And things like, did my coworkers have COVID? Is there a reasonable expectation that I did get it at work? Because the standard we use involves the probability that you got it at work. We understand that nobody can point to a moment in time and say, that's when I was infected with COVID. But what we do is consider the totality, the total circumstances, and then is it reasonable to think that this person got it at work? That's what we do. And yes, there have been thousands of claims established for COVID. So in this instance, we would recommend that Liz file that claim. Yes, file that claim. There are some circumstances there that indicate she might have gotten it at work, and in particular, the third bullet is most important. Liz received paid sick leave. Okay, that's that other element where Liz was already compensated for the 2 weeks she missed due to COVID. And so people sometimes say, well, why am I going to bother filing a comp claim now? Okay, maybe you're not going to get your lost wages through the comp claim per se because you already got them. Well, number one, the COVID insurance company is going to now pay your employer back the 2 weeks. They're going to actually pay 2/3 of it. But there's going to be some compensation there. But the more important thing for you as the worker is, remember I said medical care was a lifetime benefit? Some people don't immediately recover 100% from COVID. There's what we call long COVID. Well, if you have a comp claim, you can have your care paid for under your comp claim for the long COVID. New topic. There are some penalties for late payment. The benefits have to begin flowing within 18 days of incident or 10 days from notice if you're missing work. So, number one, this is why you tell your employer, because they tell the payer, and then the payer has to do this. If they don't, a penalty is possible. Let's say you have a hearing. Let's say the judge makes a decision that awards benefits to the worker. Well, they have to be released within 10 days of when the decision was filed. If you're getting ongoing payments every 2 weeks, your payment's not late unless it's 25 days late. That's why I'm telling you it is so much to your advantage to sign up for direct deposit because you're probably not going to have that delay. Also, if there's an appeal, interest can be due to the worker in some circumstances, so payers, please be sure to make those calculations. You do have some rights and responsibilities in this system, my friends. If you're a worker, you should try to come back as soon as you're capable. The enlightened employer will have transitional duty for you, or light duty, or something you might be able to do with a little bit of a disability, but you can come back. You can go back to your full wages. I always say enlightened employers because you have to be a certain amount of enlightened to understand, number one, if you bring the worker back, yeah, you're making some concessions to help the worker do the job because they can't do their old job right now, but you also no longer have the pressure on your insurance premium from the indemnity benefit because you put the worker back on the payroll. You should also understand any agreements you make, and if you're a worker, boy, the best thing you can do is sign up for eCase. Let me tell you. This is the tool that you can use to see all the documents in your file. If you have a comp claim, you have a lot of activity, please visit this website, sign up for eCase. It's so simple. Look, where's that little clicker? There it is. Watch this. There you go. You fill in just these few fields, and you can have access to every document in your file. You can see what all of us see. Finally, if there's hearing, well, if you have a lawyer, you and your lawyer are going to attend. If you don't have a lawyer, you certainly may get one. That's totally okay. You know the insurance payer is going to have one. There's going to be a workers' comp law judge who's going to make what we call findings of fact. We do not use the same rules of evidence that the courts, the civil courts and the criminal courts use. We don't use the same rules of procedure, but we definitely do have rules, and there is definitely an air of civility and decorum and procedure there. So, I encourage you, if you're a worker, join your hearing. If you have a lawyer, maybe follow your lawyer's advice. That's the reason why you have a lawyer. You're going to be doing things virtually, and that's great. So just to understand, it's a teleconference essentially. You're going to get a hearing notice, and the hearing notice will have the directions for doing the virtual hearing. Follow them. If you do your virtual hearing and then you want to come in person, work that out with your lawyer, you have to ask for that. You have to ask the judge for that, okay? But these virtual hearings allowed us to keep our hearings going uninterrupted during that pandemic. Remember that one? Okay. Here are our social media and public presences. The fourth one down, YouTube. Why don't you take a look at that sometime, because we have so many videos available to the public on YouTube, including these sessions. Mm-hmm. This one will be recorded and placed out there. And I think what we'll do, Allie, what do you think? We'll leave up my office's contact info. And then why don't you tell the good folks about the questions?
All right. So we addressed a few questions along the way, but we'll go back for any we did not address. So first question.
And you can certainly type some more in.
Yeah, feel free to put more questions in as we go along. So the first question is, can someone on short-term disability or long-term disability also be on workers' comp? Joe, what do we think?
No, but. Okay, so here's the long answer. That's the short answer. The long answer is worth going through. If you're injured at work, you wouldn't be on one of those benefits, short or long-term disability. You just wouldn't, because you were working and you got injured at work. here's why I say no but. Let's say you get injured at work and the insurance payer disputes the claim. Technically, we call that controverted because there's a controversy. So if the insurance payer controverts the claim, you don't have a payable workers' comp claim at that moment. So yes, you may file for short-term disability to get some income while you're waiting for the controversy to be resolved, and the controversy should be resolved within approximately 90 days. But yes, you can apply for the short-term disability. You'll have some income. Then if your claim's established, don't worry about it. The comp insurer will pay back the disability insurer. You don't need to do anything. If your claim is not established, well, then you obviously qualified for the short-term disability on its own, and then you can consider pursuing long-term disability.
All right, next question. Joe mentioned that an employee has 2 years to file a claim. What if the employee is no longer with the company? Is that time frame still valid?
Great question. Yes, it is still valid. The fact that the worker is no longer employed by that employer is of no consequence with respect to filing a claim, as in it doesn't matter. The important thing is you got hurt, you have 2 years to file a claim. And also, the insurance payer owns the claim. Remember I was saying like your HR manager is not going to know anything about your claim because they're out of the mix? They're out of the mix. The insurance payer owns that claim now moving forward.
All right, next question is how long can it take to get an MRI approved in order to get an initial diagnosis of an injury?
There are standards. There are timeframes that have to be met by the payers if a provider requests an MRI. I think, off the top of my head, based on that circumstance that you just gave, initial injury, it's probably in the neighborhood of, I think, 8 days they have to approve the level 1 request. And if they deny it, it automatically goes to a doctor at the payer. And that doctor, I think, has 4 days to review. So those are the time frames. I'm pretty sure those time frames. We do have them on our website as well.
Okay, so if you submit a C2F and send that to the insurance company, do you still need to fill out a C3?
All right. Our questioner is using some very technical terms, which is fine, but allow me to explain these technical terms that are being used. Okay, a C3, that's an employee claim form. There is an internal document that employers have that's called the C2F. Okay, we didn't talk about that because we really don't need to, but to answer this question, a C2F, like Frankenstein, is an internal document that goes from the employer to the insurance company that says, we had an incident. So, number one, if that's being filled in, it's probably being filled in by the employer, not the worker. But if for some reason, if the worker does fill it in, just understand what you're doing. You are completing a document that goes from employer to payer. So if you're the worker, yeah, you still need to file the C3 if you want to get your stuff on record, if you want to be sure it got filed with the board, because the C2F, well, that's employer to payer. We still need to close that loop and go from payer to board.
All right, we have one more question, so feel free to put more questions in if you have any. If a worker verbally notifies the employer of an incident but refuses to submit it in writing, what is the best way for the employer to proceed?
The employer?
Yeah.
Oh, tell your insurance company, tell your payer. That's once the worker tells you there's an incident, your head should be on tell payer, so that payer tells board so that we don't get penalized and so that benefits that might be necessary start flowing, okay? That is how I recommend you handle that one. Employer, always think, tell payer right now. And if there are any payers on, I think there are some, they're probably cheering right now because that's like their number one thing. Would you please tell us ASAP?
All right, we just got a last-minute question here. Thank you very much.
Sure, no problem.
First off, we have, what if the employer does not give the C3 to the claimant and we never receive it and TPA doesn't send it either?
All right. This is when we need to go deep down in the weeds, but it's a pretty quick trip. Allie, just read that section again, please.
All right. What if the employer does not give the C3 to the claimant?
That does not matter, okay? Employers can give a C3 to the worker, but they're not compelled legally, I think, to do that. They are compelled legally to tell the payer. So, workers, I'm telling you, you can certainly file a C3. The second part of that, Allie.
All right, so the second part is, and we never, if this is after if they do not give the C3, we never receive it and the TPA doesn't send it either.
Okay, we already covered that. Just tell the TPA in this instance, okay? I think we're talking to an employer here who seems to really appreciate the explanation. That's lovely. Make sure you tell the payer, okay? So the C3 is the worker's route, and the notice from employer to payer is a separate route.
Last question we have here is this program available in Spanish?
Yes, it actually is. Now, here's how that goes. I'm sure that we have recordings of this session in Spanish on YouTube. So, yes. We do periodically also run this session in Spanish, and you get a special bonus. The head of the whole agency, Clarissa Rodriguez, speaks Spanish, and she does it. I'm usually there with her, but she does it, and that's always fun. So if you want to have a special session in Spanish for your group, you should tell us, because we could certainly do that. And if you want to have a special session for your group in English, if it's okay if you just get little old me, you can tell us, and we will do that too. My friend, you keep asking the same question. If you need something in a language other than what's already translated, tell us and we can do it for you, okay? Somebody was asking about other languages. Yes, you know what? We can do other languages. Oh, okay, just kidding. The contact info on screen, that is to get to me in my office and to ask these questions or to try and arrange these special sessions. We definitely do them, and we love doing them. We can do them webinar. Allie and I can arrange a session where all you end up with is a click. You know, we send you the link, you click in, and you got your own webinar. If you have a group and you have a meeting and you want me to come visit personally, get in touch. We can do that too. All right, do we have any more questions?
That looks like all the questions we have. So I will wrap things up. Thank you so much, Joe, of course, and thank you to everyone for joining us today, and thank you for your questions. Just a reminder, you can sign up to receive workers' compensation news, including information about future webinars like the ones Joe mentioned, straight to your inbox. To sign up, visit the board's website at wcb.ny.gov, scroll down to the bottom of the homepage, select Get WCB Notifications, and then you can put in your email and subscribe to things of interest from there. We also distribute information, as Joe said, on our social media channels, so please follow us on Facebook, X, Instagram, YouTube, and pretty new is LinkedIn, so feel free to follow us there as well. Thank you all for joining us today, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.